we actually conduct these firesides. We try to have them as interactive as possible. So in order to do that, our privilege, or we try to allow everyone to participate and to express himself with questions. So in order to do that, Shane will have about 45 minutes of presentation. And after his presentation, he will allow us to have a session of Q&A, which will probably go until the end of our planned time. And in order to start on time and let you guys go back to your daily activities, if we can say that, during the time of isolation, but when we always try to have a hard stop at 9:30 EST Toronto time, so that people know that they will be free at 9:30. So without further ado, as you know, today's theme is about the impact of COVID and how does a world order come in relation to the times we're going now, to the crisis, to the global crisis. So in one of the summaries that was published at the website at Baha'i, at firesidebaha'i.com, you saw that humanity is facing one of the greatest global challenges in recent memory, the worldwide pandemic of COVID-19. The phenomenon has enveloped virtually every part of the planet and has left no one unaffected. In an unintended fashion, it has united humanity and helped us to pause and reflect on our common destiny on this planet and our assumptions and institutions built under the current world order. And it's in this perspective and with the experience that Shane brings to this team, to this discussion that has been permeating our lives every day since 2 months ago, that I would like to introduce him. Shane Tejarati is an international businessman in the field of technology and industrial safety, security, energy, and aerospace. He is a C-suite leader in a company with global operations in 5 continents. And he has over 35 years of experience in applying technology to the changing needs of humanity, and has been living and working in China for 28 years. So since the time of Deng Xiaoping, he has been there, and he has seen as an eyewitness, and I would say in a way also as an agent also of all these major differences that we witness in China this last 1/4 of a century. Today he is already with us, so I'll try to abbreviate this, but I still wanted to add that he's a fellow of the Aspen Institute and one of the co-founders of its Middle East Leadership Initiative. He's also in the China Fellowship Program, which is connected with building a good society through effective and enlightened leadership. So it's a lot about leadership, but it's a lot about vision. And I think he will share with us things that will illuminate us, and he will certainly inspire us all. I would also add something is an interesting thing about Shane is that he's also, beside all the things I said, he is an aviator and a licensed commercial pilot, and he speaks 6 languages fluently. So I think he chose to speak English today, much to our advantage. So thank you very much for being here, Shane. Thank you for being with us. Welcome. Yes, I think I have to be kind to Shane and take him out of mute. That's the least I can do as a moderator here. Yes, just a second, Shane. Thank you. Welcome, Shane.
There you go. Good evening. Good evening, everyone. And thank you, Nason, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you, everyone, for giving me the opportunity to share some thoughts with you and to be here and share this evening fireside chat. My first firesides were maybe close to 40 years ago in Montreal, where we used to go to the home of one of our very dear friends, Raymond Flournoy, and literally sit around the fireside and chat about the teachings of the faith, of the Baha'i Faith, and how they apply to the realities of humanity. And here we are with the new technology, with the aid of this medium, able to actually talk to people from around the world. So I'm very grateful for that. And it doesn't escape me how lucky we are that we can still have this in this day and age. Tonight, as Nason had asked me to address some of the challenges that I see, or some of the things that has been in my mind more than anything. I would have to say that as a Baha'i, we have always grown up to be thinking about being elements of building a new world order, because we've always been brought up with the concept, with the idea that mankind's evolution, its natural evolution, demands new ways of working around the planet for the unity of humanity. This has always been in my mind and in the mind of a lot of people of goodwill in the world. But no time have I witnessed more conversations about the world order than the past 2 or 3 months, with people from all walks of life, with people from all different backgrounds, whether business people, whether people, people who run your day-to-day life in terms of your supply chain and all that, or whether members of the family. People are really interested and are pausing to think about how do we really, what new is needed. Therefore, the title of this discussion is Global Crisis and a New World Order. So I'm going to share with you just maybe a few slides, and then hopefully most of it we can turn into a discussion and hear your points of view and your questions you may be posing tonight. And my hope is that we can also stimulate more questions, because if we ask the right questions, we're likely to be able to aim for the answers in a better fashion. So let me just share with you my screens. Oh, there you go. I can still see you. That's good. In order to look at the world order, I thought tonight I will employ the help of big history. It's a little bit easier that way. When you're in the thick of the crisis, it's harder to get better perspectives unless we pull ourselves out. And I would say that a lot of good books have been written in recent times about big history. Many of them you may be familiar with. One of my favorite ones is The Origin Story by Christensen. I like that because it kind of paints a picture of where humanity's come. So here's one aspect of big history that I wanted to share. Let's just look at maybe the rise of the West, and which happened in a number of different chunks. One chunk, of course, was the rise of China, Islam, and Byzantine, which was roughly around up to about 800 years ago, and the rise of the Roman Empire, and which continued with the rise of the West, and then the European colonization, which started around the 1500, and then went on to beget the Industrial Revolution from about 1650 up until, I would say, 1990. So that 300 years, the last 300 years, is probably we are the children of the past 300 years. We are the beneficiaries and or the actors and animators and of the past 300 years. And this 300 years up until 1990 really gave birth to what we generally know about the world today, or the world in 1990. Let's put it that way. And that was really a Western world, which was about 10% of the world's population, including North America, Western Europe, maybe some parts of Pacific and Japan, about 700 million people, which were relatively rich and were relatively in what we call them first world. And they really had most of that 10% had more than 70% of the banking systems, biggest corporations, energy usage, garbage in the world, environmental pollution, healthcare spend, military might, but also exported most of the culture and the soft power in the world. And then you had 90% of the population were in one way or another a developing world. We kind of termed them third world or developing world or emerging markets, you name it. That was roughly around 7 billion people. And when I say non-Western, I also mean non-Southern. So this was mostly a Northern Hemisphere and Western Hemisphere phenomena. And many of these nations were net poorer over a 100-year period. Then something interesting happened. If we look at the big history again, and we say the past 2,000 years, over maybe 1,500 years of that, or 1,800 years of that, China was the largest economy in the world. And then China began to have an inward look after its forays in the 14th century around the world with magnificent ships of Admiral Zheng He, who went around the world and basically found nothing except for disease and all that. Remember, this was during the Dark Ages and during the times where Africa, Middle East, and parts of Europe were really not developed, and came back to China and said to the emperor, nothing good is there. And so the emperor ordered all the Chinese ships burned, and China began an inward look. The West started colonizing, and then the discovery of America happened, the steam engine, and the story became what we had like 1990. America and the Western Europe were the dominant forces. But somehow in about 1990, things began to change. And today we have a world that has got basically two major poles. One is the Western pole, largely represented by US and Europe. And one is the rest, which I would say, I call it, instead of BRICS, I call it CREST, the big C and the rest, which is represented by China and emerging parts of the rest of the world. And when you look at in 300 years, we managed to raise about, say, roughly, say, 800 million people out of poverty. In the last 30 years, we did the same thing. So the speed of development of humanity from a perspective of big history has about 10x in the past 30 years compared to the previous 300 years. And China was responsible for 72% of that. And you can always, this is not a defense of China or indictment of the West. You can always say, well, it was done through environmental damage and prison labor or child labor or IP violations and all that. I get all of that. But also our own history of 300 years weren't necessarily the cleanest history. It was riddled with colonization, with slavery, and so on and so forth. So on balance, we had the Western development, 300 years, about 800 million people out of poverty. We had the Chinese development and the rest, 30 years, about the same. And now we are here. We are where we are in the world today, which is during this time, we have experienced and played with various forms of governing, ruling, and motivating people around the world. And in this rather ironic picture of the reds and the blues, it's also the view of how we see the world, or how one side sees the other side in the world, whether it was feudalism, imperialism, anarchy, liberal governments, and fascism, communism, whether it's seen from a socialist perspective or from a capitalist perspective, capitalism, state capitalism. We've done it all. We've played with a lot of different isms, and essentially we are today at a very interesting inflection point. I would say this to me, and I'm sure to a lot of people, as Nason said, this COVID-19 is a period of unity in some ways, a unity of all of us feeling one major force in the world, and it's an inflection point for humanity. The things that have been preoccupying the minds of myself and a lot of people is this the inadequate way in which humanity is not just responding to a health crisis. It's that response is representative of the inadequate way in which we respond to everything that is global, everything that whose purview is all of humanity, whether it's the environment, whether it's our financial crisis, whether it's the inequity between the poor and the rich, whether it's all of human affairs which require some sort of global perspective. So in the discussion of a new world order, why do we believe, or why do I believe, that we are at a time when it's timely for a discussion on a new world order? One, because I think it's totally inarguable that we are in a connected world. We are in an interconnected world. You press a button in one place, another place starts to hurt. COVID has just put that front and center to us. The other one is that despite that we are not in a united world. We are still pushing nationalism. We're still pushing parochialism, or this ism or that ism. And I believe a lot of people are asking the question, what is missing? Something is missing. My comments here are going to be overlaid or inspired by the teachings of the Baha'i Faith. So I have to preamble my discussions going forward by saying that the views expressed here are, of course, my personal views. In the Baha'i Faith, we do not have clergy or authority, personal authority. We manage the affairs of the community through institutions that are democratically elected in each locality and in each country, et cetera, and that these are my understandings, my views. And if I refer a text from Baha'i writings, those can be taken as authentic, but the understanding of those texts are my understanding. When we look at the need for a new world order, Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i Faith, over 150 years ago, he saw this world and he began to make pronouncements about the state of affairs of humanity. He saw these winds of despair that are blowing in all directions, that are dividing humanity. Long before we called it globalization, he saw one world. And he said the signs of impending convulsions and chaos can now be discerned, inasmuch as the prevailing order appeareth to be effective. When you just read that from Baha'u'llah, you may get the impression that his message is a a message of the end of times and a message of a millennial message of end of times. Far from it. In fact, Baha'u'llah saw that order to be lamentably defective for the future that humanity needs to build. In fact, he said in this passage, he says, soon will the present day order be rolled up and a new one spread out in its stead. And Baha'u'llah's vision is that humanity must work hand in hand to build that new world order. So the next passage I wanted to share with you is one that gives me a lot of hope, because and a way and a framework to see what's going on in the world today. And this is what we call the twin processes. This is a passage by Shoghi Effendi, who was the great-grandson of Baha'u'llah, who was the guardian of the Baha'i Faith, who passed away in 1957, and who was authorized as a successor in our faith to give his interpretation of the message of Baha'u'llah for humanity and how we would understand it. And his perspective is that we stand on the threshold of an age whose convulsions proclaim alike the death pangs of the old order and the birth pangs of the new. Shoghi Effendi talked about the twin processes. He talked about a process of disintegration and a process of integration, like unraveling a carpet and rolling out a new one in its stead. And this to me is a sense of hope, in a sense, when we see things that are disintegrating or are inadequate for humanity, we don't just procrastinate or focus on that as the only force working on human affairs, but rather that there are, because of this need to progress as from a village to a clan to city to country to now the world order, that we need to build a new order, and that the fact that the old is actually failing is a very natural fact. In the context of New World Order, I would like to propose these three main principles, if you like. And again, these are my understanding of how these principles are inspired by the Baha'i teachings. One, and the most fundamental of all principles, is the principle of oneness of mankind. It is the bedrock of all the other principles upon which the Baha'i teachings are built. The concept of the unity of humanity in all its aspects. The second is that progress of civilization, of building an ever-advancing civilization, has both a material side and a spiritual side. This dual aspect that humans have, that we have a physical body and a spiritual existence or reality, also applies to the society in general, that we need to not only take care of the affairs of mankind in a material fashion, but we need to do the same in a spiritual fashion, that they need to be in harmony, and they both need to be progressive, that science and religion have to go hand in hand, and that we need the aid of both in order to fulfill the requirements of this age. The third thing, which probably, and these are not in order in this way, they're interconnected, maybe better to show them in a triangle or something. The third piece is the need for global solutions to humanity's problems. That today, more than ever, if the oneness of mankind is a reality, if the interconnectedness of humanity is a reality, therefore solutions for complex needs of humanity must be global in nature. Baha'i teachings tell us that that the oneness of on the concept of oneness of humanity, that that it's the pivot around which the teachings of Baha'u'llah revolve. But it's not just a mere outburst of ignorant emotionalism or an expression of vague and pious hope. And it's not just the reawakening of the spirit of brotherhood and goodwill among men. And Baha'u'llah says, Shoghi Effendi here says, nor does it claim solely aim solely at the fostering of harmonious cooperation among individual peoples and nations. In the teachings of Baha'u'llah, very specific principles have been given in order to recognize, and Baha'i communities around the world every day strive towards the fulfillment of this grand vision of the oneness of humanity that Baha'u'llah has brought. When we talk about the spiritual and the material advancement, the Baha'i teachings calls for a reconstruction of the world, a world organically united in all its essential aspects of life, its political machinery, its spiritual aspiration, its trade and finance, its script and language, yet infinite in the diversity of the national characteristics of its federated units. In a sense, what this is saying, and what Baha'u'llah said, is that humanity must move towards unity, but also must preserve the richness of its diversity. Unity in diversity is the bedrock of this principle. And this global solution, why do we need a global solution? And the principle of that is that as human beings go through the stages of infancy, childhood, adolescence, and maturity, humanity as a whole is also going through those stages. The birth of family life, subsequent development of tribal solidarity that turned into the city-state, and then institutions of independent sovereign states. The new global citizenship, the concept of oneness of humanity, represents the consummation of human evolution. That means humanity is going through what us humans physically go through in our lives. What satisfies our lives as an adult, it does not do so, or as a child does not do so as an adolescent or as an adult. Our needs continue to progress, and so does the needs of humanity. From a Baha'i perspective, the actors in this melodrama are at these levels: at the level of the individual, at the level of the community, and at the level of institutions. Baha'is try to be protagonists and proponents and active in all of these by living an individual life or family life that is congruent with our teachings, by independent investigation of truth, by considering all humanity as one, by upholding education and the equality of men and women, and all the principles that are wonderful, by edifying our own souls and bringing our lives in line with these wonderful teachings. At the community level, Baha'is strive in a life of service to humanity and sacrifice for their communities in ways of building in society capacity among the youth, among the children, in their neighborhood, and in whatever else they do, including their work, including considering work in the spirit of service as an act of prayer for the community, an act of worship in the community. And of course, in helping build institutions in their communities that support this material and spiritual civilization. Finally, I just want to share a quote. The Baha'i teachings are teachings of hope. When we look at the world around us and crumbling, we have this hope that it is a natural evolution of humanity toward this inevitable, not only necessary, but inevitable stage of maturity of humankind. That this principle of oneness carries with it no more or no less a solemn assertion that the attainment of that is that this is a stupendous evolution, not a small evolution, but the attainment is both necessary and inevitable. And Baha'is around the world strive by their individual, by their community, and by collective actions to live with that, and they drive their hope from this inspiration. So I'm going to stop at this point and then see whether we have any thoughts, any questions, any reaction.
Shane, the first thought I have is that probably Zoom is overloaded because we had some technical problems and unfortunately the chat box is not appearing. But the good side of it, if COVID-19 has a good side, certainly this has another good side because we all can just raise our hands and unmute ourselves, which we all can do, and have our questions. So now that you guys know that there is no chat and I'm interrupting, so I would like to place the first question. In my view, most of the people, when people talk about the organical need for change in the world, and when they talk about a new governance or a new reality, which you are defining as a new world order, most of the people don't think that religion has anything to do with this. Mm-hmm. I think if you talk exactly what you just said, but you don't raise the origin of your thought is the Baha'i Faith, people will say, oh, probably it's a paper by the UN or something. So while my friends think about other questions, why don't you elaborate on this? How come religion would be the source of a new world order and not the governments, or is it both of them together?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. And I would say that, again, if we put our global hat on, that may be the narrative in a lot of the Western and some of the Western Southern hemisphere. But I think throughout history, and part of that history is the past 30 years outside of the Western world, the spiritual yearnings of mankind has been pivotal in its material civilization and the development of its material civilization, whether it was in the Christian civilization and the rise of the West and Renaissance and so on and so forth, or in the East with the rise of Islam and the contributions that it's had to mathematics, to architecture, to everything else, to algebra, to everything that we know. Humanity is, human beings are made of both material and spiritual susceptibilities and feelings. I give you an example of China. People think of China as a place that is fundamentally devoid of religion. It's a communist country. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. First of all, the last time they exercised communism must be over 20 years ago when they basically announced that private property is legal and so on and so forth. They're pretty, state capitalism is very much alive. But over the past 30 years, as they have fast forwarded this material development, a lot of things has fallen apart. Not just the environment, but the unit of family, the moral fabric of society, the education of the children. And the Chinese are rising in a very, very vivid and big way and saying something is missing. Spiritual yearning and the yearning for religion in China is probably one of the highest in the world, exactly for the reasons that we just talked about. because they grew materially so much without regard for spirituality. And the yearning, now Christianity, one of the fastest places on earth that Christianity is growing is exactly in China. Cult religions and so on and so forth. So I think, yes, part of the narrative that religion, people are cynic about religion, especially the young. In a recent survey by Deloitte, more than 50% of millennials and Generation Z do have zero trust on religious leaders. But they also have zero trust, about 40%, on political leaders. They also have zero trust on the next generations, about 30% of them. Yes, because we have created in the West maybe a perspective of religion that is somewhat incongruent with reality. We don't see religion as in harmony with science. We believe religion to be a set of superstitions and practices, and then science, economics, and social development, another set. So the Baha'i concept is that humanity is in need of spiritual development. It is undeniable, but it is in a need in harmony. So religions have always been the source of inspiration. And in the Baha'i Faith, we believe that the development of civilization must needs, or ever advancing civilization, must needs go hand in hand between science and religion, or between material development and spiritual development.
So friends, feel free. I may not be able to see your hands raised, so I will just encourage you. Yeah, I see some. Ray Acciardo, yes, you want to talk? Okay, I'm
yes.
Unmuting you. Yes, go ahead, Ray. Go ahead,
Nathan,
Ray.
thank you for the time. I have a question for the professor. It was a wonderful exposition and a great detail about the world today. And I wonder if, in continuing the theme of religion, if the division, there seems to be a division between Islam and Christianity, how this impacts, the further development of the Baha'i Faith, its attachment to Islam and so on, whether it hinders or helps, or whether some reconstruction of the path forward can be made to bear. What do you think about that aspect?
Yes, very much so. I think it's, if we go again about 100 years, the face of the world has changed, in a sense that 100 years ago, Christianity was the largest religion in the world, and actually paganism was the second largest. Today, Christianity and Islam are equal, about 32-33% of the world each, and paganism is one of the smallest. So, and other folk religions, and there's Judaism and other Buddhism and Hinduism and so on and so forth. The fact is that the Baha'i Faith grew out of a milieu of Islam in the Middle East, but it is not an Islamic religion. It is in the same way that Christianity grew out of a Judaic milieu or bedrock. But nonetheless, it considers itself as one and the same in the family of all the great religions of the world. The fundamental belief of the Baha'is is that religious truth is not absolute. It's relative. Its foundational teachings are one, that it is the same message from a creator that we do not understand, but from time to time sends us teachers to tell us an aspect of it, but that as humanity's needs progress, that these religions continue to progress. So the Baha'i Faith does not claim finality to itself either. It just claims that it is the latest, but not the last religion. So I think in a sense, because of this apparent conflict that's coming in the world between what you termed as Islamic and Christian world, or this, which are now equal in population, I do hope that the Baha'i message of the oneness of religion, that the progressive nature of religion, and the fact that the Baha'i faith came from an Islamic milieu, but is equally rooted in the teachings of Christianity and equally considers the teachings of other religions valid, would be able to build a bridge in a meaningful way. That is why Baha'i communities around the world are, for example, involved in the interfaith dialogue. Sometimes in certain communities, including in the United Nations, Baha'is are called upon to be in front or sometimes chair the interfaith dialogue. And people of goodwill that are devoid of prejudice actually welcome this, because in some ways they see the Baha'is neither of the West nor of the East, neither of the South nor of the North, that somehow we can play that role. Of course, that's not uniform everywhere in the world, but that is a role that the Baha'is hope to be able to play through this marvelous teachings of not just oneness of humanity, but oneness of religion. Nisan, I think I did not hear what Ray said.
Thank you, Mr. Acciardo. We didn't hear what you say. Can you repeat it? You were muted.
Yes, I wanted to say that that was a wonderful answer, very complete, and I appreciate the expression, just like a professor. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so guys, just feel free to ask. Yes, Levon. Levon is raising her hand. Levon, go ahead.
I unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, you are. Just speak loud. I don't know, your mic is a little low. Yeah, people are telling you,
Okay.
please speak loud.
So first of all, thanks for the invitation. And thank you very much for the history review. I think it framed the discussion very nicely. I want to take a more a feminist slant on it a little bit. I've been having discussions like everyone else with friends and family about everything that's happening and where we are and where we're going. And we've been noticing that countries that are having most success in dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic are run by women, okay, are led by women. So New Zealand, Thailand, Taiwan, Germany, and so on.
Denmark.
Yeah. Pardon? Yes, and the Scandinavian countries as well, correct. So, and this kind of, women make up more or less 50% of the population. However, we do not make up more or less 50% of leadership in institutions, in government, in organizations in general. So this is another imbalance that we are suffering in the world, where we do not have representation as 50% of the population within government, within institutions. And we are seeing, as you mentioned, a movement to a new world order where we are seeing the success of women in leadership to deal with complex issues such as the pandemic that we're going through right now. Do you have anything to say on this?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you raised this issue because the Baha'i principles not only talk about unity of mankind, but within that context, very much pull out and emphasize the concept of the equality of men and women. In fact, I think in the Baha'i faith, we are a little bit more equal in that context. Let me explain. First and foremost, Baha'is believe that the human soul is devoid of gender. The gender is a material reflection of this world, that in the sight of God, and we believe in life after death, that our souls are gender free. that it's a necessity for this world. And so we are both a spiritual and a physical being, and we are equal in the sight of God from our essence and our very much our being. We are not the same physically, but we are equal in all rights and privileges, and especially from a spiritual and perspective. The Baha'i teachings put the education of women as even a higher priority than education of men. Not that you know, if you had choices, you would make a difference, but it emphasizes through an example that if a set of parents could only educate one child, they should give the preference to the woman, because it's the women who actually are the nurturers of society as in a very big way. The Baha'i teachings consider the equality of men and women as paramount in their work in the world. In fact, I would have to say that maybe Baha'u'llah was one of the greatest first feminists in the past 150, 180 years. His son Abdul Baha, who was the authorized authorized interpreter of his teachings and the promoter of his faith, and who came to America in the beginning of the 20th century in 1912, promoted the equality of women tremendously. But he went even further. He called humanity like a bird that needs to fly with two wings. These two wings being the man and the woman. And he said how broken a bird would be if it only had one wing. But he went further. He said, until and unless, and I'm just paraphrasing the quotation we can find, until and unless the equality of men and women are fully recognized and realized, world peace and tranquility is impossible. When I read that, I was startled. How is that out of all the principles of the faith, of all the things that we do, that, and then Abdul Baha went on to explain that women have have a nature that is complementary and different than men. They do not seek conflict in the same way. They can exhibit all of the characteristics that we aspire for to in a marvelous fashion, such as justice, equity, compassion, love, and so on and so forth. And that we have created a too lopsided a masculine world, that we need to bring those wondrous and wonderful qualities that women leaders can bring to the world. Well, in this pandemic, it became front and center. It became, I think that teaching of Baha'u'llah, the interpretation of Abdul Baha, the words of Abdul Baha became even more evident to me, that what the world is missing in a very big way is the participation, the full participation at all levels of leadership of half of humanity who bring a fundamentally different perspective to almost every subject we can. I don't know if I'm answering your question right or not, but it is, Baha'is believe that deep in their heart and work in their communities to bring that about.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is Samim.
I just wanted to first thank you so much. You have shared great knowledge with us today. And I hope we're going to get that recording later on to deepen.
Yes, with Shane's permission, we are recording it, and in a few days we'll have it posted, and also the presentation. It was good, Samim, that you raised this point. The presentation will be downloadable at the Fireside Baha'i site. So you go to the appropriate area and download the PDF starting from tonight.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
So
yeah,
my question really was to really wonder what is your opinion in terms of how important is financial inclusion at the times of crisis like today, but also in the future in the terms of the new world order in order to be established. As you know, there are at least, they say 3.2 billion unbanked in the world, and some other statistics saying actually 1.7 billion unbanked, and about 3.8 that have no access to the internet. What is your opinion about the importance of financial inclusion?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think I go back to first principles on this. We are building both a spiritual and a material world. And we Baha'is don't believe that you live with an end of time mindset that it's the end of times, and then when you die, you go up, but you don't have to do much here. You just believe and pray and do your own life. So we have to build something. Building this world requires material needs, and it requires financial means, requires economic means. The problem is that those instruments are not equally available to all of humanity. Remember the third principle I said, that the solutions need to be global in nature?
Yes.
Well, one of the biggest solutions, one of the biggest ills of humanity is an unequal and broken global economic structure. So part of it is access. Part of it is the lopsidedness with which we have created, misaligned incentives for big corporations around the world, which actually themselves many of them have become greater than countries. The top 100 Fortune 100s of the world are bigger than the bottom 100 countries in the world. In fact, their impact on technology, on social change, on culture, and on economic and public policy is far greater than the bottom 100 countries, far greater. So those are all questions of world order on the sphere of governance, on the sphere of economics, that must be addressed at a fundamental level. If we truly believe that humanity is one, how could we say that there is a third world and there is a first world, and the way the third world will develop is that the first world will somehow aid it? Well, it hasn't worked in 300 years. That model of development, well, I don't know where you're based, but I'm sure if you're in somewhere in the Western world, it was populated by colonialism, by slavery, and by financial colonialism. We need to include all of humanity in the conversation of development of human affairs. And economic and financial freedom and transparency is one big element of it. We would have to get to a radical rethinking of even, and I won't get too much into it, but radical rethinking of even accounting principles. We don't account for all the natural resources of the world. All the oil in the world is free, except our efforts to get it out makes the price of the oil. But we don't think in terms of what that does to the environment, to social change, and so on and so forth. It doesn't sit on anybody's books. If we did proper accounting, most Fortune 100 companies will actually be underwater and will be bankrupt. So if we think in terms of that, we need to bring the rest of humanity, the other 2 or 3 billion that are not participant in the economic affairs of mankind, on a par.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, friends, thanks to Samim, I was reminded also that you can raise your hand electronically, and this way even those that are not appearing, and I can only read a few names, could also ask. But I would also be very happy to see your faces, and I'm sure I'm talking on behalf of Shane as well. If anybody can come in and ask, we'll be very happy, and Shane is here for you, and we have a lot of time still. So any other questions? Otherwise, I'll do what I love the most, which is, oh yes, Ronald, please go on. Ronald's from Sao Paulo, Brazil, please.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Nathan, for the invitation to be part of this conversation. Well, I don't have a question, Mr. Shane, but I have a perspective.
Yes.
Because I am from Brazil. I graduated in architecture, and I worked for the last 40 years with corporations as a brand strategist.
Yes.
As a brand strategist, I have never seen or used the word spiritualization in a corporation, because this word is not welcome in corporations. And our society nowadays is designed by corporations, is managed by corporations. And the main challenge probably that we will have is to change the paradigms of corporations or the paradigms of capitalism, like competition, like words that are not more usable in this new context. So the change, this could be a question. How do we change the mindset of corporations that are designed to compete?
Yes. Well, first of all, I want to completely agree with you that on both things. One is that vocabulary of the spiritual vocabulary doesn't not only exist, but is not even welcome. That I totally agree with you. Secondly, is that corporations are tremendously powerful and are shaping society. I think, and yesterday I was speaking to a group of business people in Europe and around the world, and it was exactly on this topic, on the topic of globalization, the role of big corporation, and the necessary transition that needs to happen. I think one of the things is that corporations, we design corporations in the past 200 years through the capitalist system with the idea that they will serve the public. But the gravitation over the past 100 years, and especially in the past 60, 70 years after World War II, is that they increasingly serve a very small number of shareholders. Yes, they have a lot of maybe public shareholding, but it's really institutional shareholders and a small group of management that actually is misaligned with public welfare. They are incentivized to maximize profits, and their value is generated through growth, earnings, and cash. Of course, you can say companies have to be environmentally friendly, otherwise they'll get punished. Companies have to be, there is a movement to ESG. Of course, there is brand, there is employee loyalty, there's intellectual property, there's technology. But by and large, the big corporations, the ones you're talking about, their alignment is around growth, earnings, and cash, maximizing the financial profits. And of course, they want to be good citizens because it's a good thing to do. There is, however, a big movement to make the corporations more aligned with the stakeholders' expectations, which are all human beings that are being shaped by those. The ESG movement is a very good one. The Perspective 21 to 21st century is a good one. The B Corp and the B Lab movement, which is forcing corporations to think about the holistic impact of a corporation on human affairs. But I would say much more needs to be done. On a scale of 1 to 100, we are in early stages of single digit in that paradigm. And some element of that is what corporations do to the moral and spiritual fabric of society. Now, corporations don't need to come out and be our church, but they need to understand that they have a significant impact on the moral and fabric of society. And the other big portion of it is the social fabric of society. The divide between 99% and 1%, corporations are a big part of that divide. So I think there are a lot of people of goodwill, whether it's in Sao Paulo, like yourselves, or in Toronto, or in China. This morning, I was talking to my very good friend, Jay Cohen, who's the founder of B Corp and B Labs, who's now going on and doing other things with people of similar-minded people. His main thesis is the misalignment of big corporations' incentives with the well-being of humanity. We need to transition that in the New World Order.
Thank you.
Yes, please, Don, go ahead, please. I'm unmuting you just in case. Just a second. I'm trying to unmute you. You have to unmute yourself.
Yes, I did it. Hi, everybody. That was really interesting, and actually, it goes. I mean, I kind of tie it together with Lavon's question too, because I was really almost more interested in the question somehow. I think I'm stuck back there than in the answer. I apologize for that. But one thing that I did read in my look at the Baha'i writings is a statement that addresses the idea of competition, and it says, "Vie with one another in service." So that vying together, that's really competition. That's in a way, it can be working against one another. It can also be working with one another.
Yeah.
It can be setting up, and you see this all the time in corporations, teams of the finance people have a contest with the marketing people to see who can raise the most money for the feeding of poor people. That's vying together. That's competition, but the alignment is really much different from what we normally see. And so when I look at the idea that women are really tragically underrepresented in everything that let's say makes things happen, or that we imagine makes things happen. I wonder if corporations influenced by women will really take a different view of competition and really look at the alignment more than men do now. And I'm not calling down men. I think men are trying their best, but they're men.
Well, Donald, thank you for that. I think there are many things. First of all, I also agree with you. Questions are more important than answers these days, because the history of the world is a history of the wrong questions being asked. And then it doesn't really matter then what answers you have. But if you can be enabled to ask the right questions, if we can frame the question right and challenge each other to ask the right questions, and then humanity as a whole, we can all strive to find the answers. I think the two things come to mind with your comment. One is this vying in the act of service. Its foundation is in selflessness. The Baha'i teachings fundamentally promote the idea that ego and self-centering ourselves in universe is a root cause of a lot of our problems. That we should be like we are for our families, like we are for our children, like we are for our spouse or for our parents or for our relatives, that we should be in that posture, in that mindset for humanity. If we are like that, then we will vie for service to that. Like our siblings vie for service, for doing something for our parents, not because we want to jump forward. Maybe when we were kids, we wanted more favors, but now we don't. We just want to show our love. We want to show our selfless, love for our parents. So one of them is the concept of service and selflessness. The second thing you mentioned about corporations run by women, I don't have a full study to show you and say, well, these are all the evidences and so on and so forth. There are a lot of studies in that area. But I have a lot of anecdotal references to that. But whether it's in my own organization where we measure, women participation, and we take out all of the anomalies. For example, I have 55,000 employees. A majority are women. But when I take out the factory workers that we need small and precise hands to put together the electronic stuff that are like 80% women, when I take that out, then it's a much more equalized equation. In every geography that we have a larger representation of women managers, those geographies financially, socially, and from CSR, from culture, retention of staff, do better. In every one of them. And it's culture agnostic. I have a big business in Brazil. I have a big business in rest of Latin America, in Africa, in Eastern Europe, in Middle East, in India, in China. It doesn't matter where. Wherever you have. The highest actually percentage I have is in China. And it's our best performing geography in the world. The second thing is I've met a lot of companies run by women. I can think of at least 2 or 3 in India that are exemplary in both innovation, in service to humanity, and in their priorities in advancing technology and so on and so forth, but also their bottom lines are fantastic. And they're not few. I can think of 2 or 3 of them right off the top of my head in for example, in the area that is not even related to me, in biotech. I think there is something there, for sure.
Yes, Lavon, go ahead again.
Just a short expression that I grew up hearing. I really don't know where it's from, but it's something that always stuck with me. And I think maybe it's pertinent here. It says, the hand that rocks the cradle rocks the world. I don't know if anybody else knows that one.
Yeah, of course.
I heard that.
Yeah.
Shane, there is something I wanted to share in the line of what you just said and what was asked by Ronald. And I really am very empathetic to this, because I know that when I take off my Baha'i hat and I go into a meeting with my business people, I have to be very careful with some words. Otherwise, people think I'm nuts or something. But I'm seeing a transformation. I think this conversation with business people that you had yesterday, correct me if I'm wrong, would not be possible 10 years ago. So one thing that strikes me, I was at the living room of one of the gentlemen here in this conversation, and I was reading this magazine. I'm sorry, I tried to share it, but I couldn't share it. So I'm showing you one of the maybe signs of capitalism in the world, which is the Fortune magazine. And these are 3 of the most famous CEOs of corporations, right? Jimmy Dimon of JP Morgan, and that is your colleague, Shane, from IBM. Yeah. And this is the title I wanted to show, and I wanted your comments about this.
Yeah, profit and purpose.
Okay, so in a new world in which every particle of our society has a new definition, religion has to be reevaluated. We show our knowledge of religion thinking that it should be something very far from science. You're repositioning this because you say that Baha'u'llah, one of the principles was religion. You didn't say that, of course, but I know it's embedded in your presentation that religion without science is superstition. Science without religion is materialism. So do you think there will be a new definition, not only for religion, but for cooperation in the next global society, or as you said, in the world order that is coming ahead of us?
The short answer is absolutely. A little bit longer answer is that some signs of that are already being seen. And for example, as I mentioned, in the B-Lab movement, in the various different movements, in the ESG movement, holding corporations more accountable to the broader welfare of humanity. A bit longer answer is that it's totally inadequate. If you, and there is complete misalignment still at the big corporation level between what is the incentives of the big leaders of big corporations. By the way, I'm a big leader in a big corporation, and I struggle with that because I'm trying to do my bit in bringing more alignment. But there is a big misalignment. So I think even from a social perspective, there has to be fundamental change to the big corporations' alignment with the welfare of humanity. Now, if we say that the corporations are built fundamentally today on this single axis, which is a material development, even on that axis, only one of the axes, which is the financial well-being. Imagine if we in our families, we just wanted to get rich, but didn't matter that we didn't have health or good family life, good marriage, good behavior, or you know, and did it at any cost. How much of a unwanted citizen we would be. This is how the corporations are. Now we're trying to make them accountable for the environment. We're trying to make them accountable for this. It's almost childish. I think a redefinition of what is a good society, which we are going through right now, and it's like the fundamental subject matter of the conversation in the world that's happening today, needs to happen at the corporate level too. If corporations, to Ronald's point, are affecting the fortunes of mankind as much or even bigger than even big countries, how could we exempt them from discussion about the social and spiritual development of humanity? How we do it, I don't know exactly, but we absolutely cannot put that off the table.
Ronald, go ahead, please.
Yes. I think that corporations nowadays are the main agent of change. And that's why I work with brand strategy, because my personal challenge is to change that mindset. If you use the word purpose in the place of the word religion, you see that it's more likable for entrepreneurs to understand that they have to have a purpose. And probably if you change the word religion with the word philosophy, or you have to have a philosophy of a corporation, or you have to have a philosophical drives in the sense of a vision. That is what moves corporations, and the vision that incorporates the idea of oneness, or the idea of responsibility that the corporations have to have, because they are huge and they have much more power than some governments. This is a cultural place to spot, I think. And I would say that talking about philosophy and about Spinoza specifically, that sees God as nature, we are in a great need of respecting much more nature in this very moment, because this is what we caused through COVID. This is an imbalance in our relationship with nature, with the God of Spinoza. And probably this is the starting point of the new normal that we are all trying to guess what would be.
Very well said. Very well said.
Guys and girls, to be respectful to both men and women, we still have 10 minutes, so I think we have a good 2 questions to grant, and I feel in the faces that some people are in the craving of saying something. So don't let me ask the names. Please go ahead and ask. Yeah. Okay. One of them is smiling. I'm going to pass it to Vitor. Vitor, would you like to say something? Just unmute yourself. I can't unmute you by some strange reason, please. Vitor, você está no mute.
No.
Okay.
It's okay. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you, Shane, for your wonderful speech. I'm too from São Paulo, Brazil. It's not really a question, but I'm trying to, from another point of view, to enhance what Ronald just said. I am not an expert in Baha'i. I have good friends, and Nathan is one of them, and always admire the fundamental, the values, and so on. I am a little bit more acquainted with anthroposophy of Rudolf Steiner. And he said that nowadays, he was looking for the future, the people of organization will be the responsible for the change, because they have the power, because they have the know-how, the instruments, and so on. So, Ronald, you are absolutely right. We have today, and I am a consultant in organizations. We have to fight to choose the right word to touch the heart of the businessmen and the business women, that they are the responsible people for helping the change of the world. And just that.
Thank you.
And of course, one thing more, like a consultant and a professor in university, of course, education from the very beginning with the child and the adults, we have a tremendous work to do too. So businessmen and educators, teachers, professors, and so on.
Vitor, I'm very happy you mentioned education, because in the discussion we just had in the previous questions of how do we help corporations transition, and as Ronald mentioned, that religious words and phraseology or even concepts are sometimes not welcome. Well, look at in a lot of the Western world, and in a big portion in countries like China and all that, discussion on religion and spirituality are not allowed in schools either. So we are expected to to segregate. We think in terms of segregation of if you look like politics and religion in terms of secularism, we take it right down to the education of children. So in the Baha'i Faith, it is believed that family life and the raising of the children, we have to raise them in both spiritual and material fashion, that children have to become aware, and that in schools, teachers must teach them both spiritual and material science, and that they should be aware of their own spiritual susceptibility. Obviously, not just one religion, but the fact that all religions are the same, the fact that as you grow up and go into a company and you become actors and animators in a corporation, that you should be aware of your own spiritual, impact in the world. That is part of the transition. The part of this transition is not just making corporations spiritual, but the people who run them to have that fundamental, if you like, upbringing.
Shane, we do have two last questions.
Yes.
Ronald has asked, and then Don. So please go ahead, Ronald.
No. It's done. I'm okay.
Okay, so Don, you're the last guy.
Yeah, I couldn't get myself unmuted. I'm sorry. Yeah, I liked the reference to Rudolf Steiner. You know, he had this concept of essentially respect. I guess if you want to look at it in the biggest possible way, but what I see the Baha'i teachings as doing is taking this idea of respect. You know, respect for yourself, of course. You have to have that, or you don't have the capacity to have respect for anyone or any other thing. And then you just enlarge that circle more and more. And that's, I think, the thing that corporations really have to learn to do, is to show respect.
Yes.
In a real sense, and not just for show, not just for the MD&A part of the balance or the annual report.
Yes.
It really has to be true and real and demonstrable. I think there are corporations that really do that. They really do take it to heart. But
Yes.
because corporations are in some ways not accountable for the failure to make the right decision, they're always accountable for making the wrong one. That comes up. But the failure to make the correct decision, sometimes that gets lost. Respect, I think, is that's the corporate equivalent of spirituality.
Yes, I can't agree more. And it really comes down to, Donald, to enlightened leadership within those corporations. Even in a big corporation, we are a big Fortune 100 market cap corporation. Even in a big corporation, you can, as a leader, demand that certain processes be done with that respect and purity of motive. For example, I'll give you an example. We have a fund that we use for corporate social responsibility. And when we're thinking about a program in China, we have that program in 20 different countries, but it started with China, called Safe Kids. And when the questions around how to help children to be safe at home, because more than 1 million children at home get injured in China alone, and in India and Brazil, all over the world. When we were thinking about that, by the way, we run that program in Brazil, it's very nice. And when our branding and marketing people are saying, well, how do we use that for augmenting our brand? As a leader, I said, well, that should not be part of the question for us. It should not be part of the consideration. We should be thinking about what do we do to make the greatest impact? Because we already have dedicated that fund for service to humanity. It should be done in a pure and uninterrupted fashion. That changes the culture. And so we don't have a branding campaign. Incidentally, that became a phenomenal branding success because we did it so selflessly. So it's possible to do. You have to embed the process within the context of a big corporation. It's possible to do.
I just picked up in your last remarks that you mentioned purity of motive. That in the corporate world is called usually conflict of interest, or not having conflict of interest. It's incredible how these things are, how the Baha'is always constantly say, if you do something, let it be something that you detach yourself from the results or from having a space in heaven just because you did that, with purity of motive. And in the corporate world, it's called It's a different word, but it's the same feeling. So maybe you could elaborate in the final words, that we just have like 2 or 3 minutes, but please, Shane, if you could finish with what is your message and your encouragement for them to go after more information about Baha'i Faith, maybe visit Fireside Baha'i, but there are many, many other things you can use as source.
Well, first of all, once again, I want to thank all of you for being participative. And I think one of the fundamental and most important principles of the Baha'i Faith is consultation. And that we don't have somebody preaching or a professor giving a lecture or something like that. The more you engage in consultation and in inquiry and in being inquisitive, I think the more we Baha'is can learn, and we can all learn together. The second is that independent inquiry into truth. The Baha'i teachings are a wonderful repository of many truths, but they need to be interrogated, investigated, and used as points of conversation and consultation. So I encourage you, I invite you to find your Baha'i friends, independently look into them and all that, with the eye that at the end of the day, we all here to contribute to the advancement of humanity, to build a better society. And recently I've been thinking about something, and that is that, what if we were being watched by ET, by an extraterrestrial, by an alien, 100 miles out in space, and he's been just, because time is different for them, maybe past 300 years, he's been just looking at it and looking at COVID too and humanity. What would he or she say? What report will he write or will she write home about this humanity? How would our scorecard look in the concept of building a good society? We Baha'is are trying to do something so that ET would write a good report home, I hope.
This is a great finish for a great talk. Thank you so much, Shane.
Thank you.
I know your time is limited. Thank you for giving it to us.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed the discussion.
Everybody's in mute, so you just see the movement of the hand. Don't hear it, but thank you so much. And friends, in a couple of days, and so please be our guest to recommend or click in the link and see this presentation. I'm sure that some people that will feel it in their heart, and the same way we did today. Thanks to Shane, thanks to all of you. And remember, the presentation itself will be at www.firesidebaha'i.org, and it will be in the downloadable session of the presentation that Shane did. And we always have meetings. If you allow us, we'll invite you to others.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Shane. Send my best to Mona, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.